The change from hand loom to steam loom weaving was disastrous for our family. My father did not recognize the impending revolution and was struggling under the old system. Dreadful days came when my father took the last of his webs to the great manufacturer, and I saw my mother anxiously awaiting his return to know whether the new web was to be obtained or that a period of idleness was upon us. I remember that shortly after this, I began to learn what poverty meant. There came a resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man. These opening words are a slice in time that cuts a deep wound into the soul of Andrew Carnegie. With his own eyes, he watches a skilled man, a proud man, a respected man become a poor man. Technology advances, his father does not, and that never left him. Years later, when he embraces the new steel technology, that's this moment. When he obsesses over cost, that's also this moment. When he refuses to be dependent, that is this moment. If you'd like to understand this promise in detail, it's all in the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, which I just finished reading, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I learned with you today. These are really memoirs that Carnegie wrote for his friends and his family. They're plain spoken, but they jump around a lot. And he makes some assumptions that the reader already has some prior knowledge of events. So I had to go back and look up several things and reread some various sections to get the full grasp, which is okay because that gives me a deeper insight into Carnegie and who he was. He says to write the memoirs, he was inspired by his friend Judge Mellon. And Judge Mellon, he was the founder of the Mellon banking dynasty. And it's interesting that Judge Mellon was also inspired by the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin as he wrote his works. And the way I see this is like a chain link of great memoirs that you and I can learn from. Ben Franklin, Judge Mellon, Andrew Carnegie. So let's go ahead and we'll step into the story. Carnegie, he was born in Scotland in the year 1835. Now his family, they weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable in their roots in Scotland that went back for generations. So on one side of the family, you have laughter and you have wit in his grandfather Carnegie. And then on the other side, you have politics and public speech with his grandfather Thomas Morrison. The house that he grew up in, it wasn't a small thinking house. His father and his uncles, they often had political figures over to the house. They had businessmen over to the house. And what they would do is they would have debates. So Andrew, at the age of like 5 or 6, he's seeing all of this. Andrew's father, he also operated a small business. He had like 4 or 5 of these looms and he was making high-end textiles. Things, they're generally good. And Andrew, he's taking all of this in with really great delight. As a youth, Carnegie starts school at the age of 8, and he generally has really high spirits unless something holds him up. And this is where we see a bit of a hot streak in him. He was often late to school because one of his chores was to go out and fetch water from the community well in the morning. Well, the older ladies, what they would do is they would place their cans in a line the night before. And those cans were like placeholders for their position in line. Carnegie, he wasn't having any of that. He didn't like being late for school. This, as might be expected, led to numerous contentions in which I would not be put down even by these venerable old dames. I earned the reputation of being an awful laddie. An awful laddie to those women was indeed correct. He would never give up his place. Now, while he was in school, he says that his outlook was generally optimistic in nature. My ability to shed trouble and to laugh through life, making all my ducks swans. That is such a great line. He goes on to say the following: a sunny disposition is worth more than a fortune. Young people should know that it can be cultivated. that the mind, like the body, can be moved from the shade into sunshine. Let us then move it, laugh trouble away if possible, and one usually can if he be anything of a philosopher, provided that self reproach comes not from his own wrongdoing. This sunny nature, it leads a young Andrew into his first business of taking care of rabbits, for which he's going to hire his playmates to go out and collect all of the food in the fields. Their reward for doing so, and this is really great, when the time came, he would pay these little employees with the opportunity to give the rabbits a name. That's so creative. I really love how kids think. It's so simple, but it works really well. And Carnegie writes about this. He discovers something very early on in life. I treasure the remembrance of this plan as the earliest evidence of organizing power, a success not to be attributed to what I have known or done myself, but to the faculty of knowing and choosing others who did know better than myself. We see this all the time on the show. For example, episode 22 with Leonard Lauder. He had resolved early on in his business life that he was only going to hire people that were smarter than he was. Estee Lauder, at the time he joined the company, they were doing $1 million a year in sales. And then when he passed away just this last year in 2025, they were doing over $16 billion in sales. His secret weapon? Hiring the smartest people that he could possibly find. Carnegie, he knew this at the age of 8, and it's going to be made even stronger in his later business years. Now, meanwhile, back at home, his father is going to start losing his business due to the rise of the modern steam loom that just keeps running. Carnegie sees what's happening with his own eyes and he feels the pain in his heart. Technology, or not using technology in this case, changes his walk in life forever. As Andrew advances in school, he's really blessed with this strong power to memorize facts and figures. Anything which pleased me, I could learn with rapidity, which surprised partial friends. I could memorize anything, whether it pleased me or not. Holding on to facts, as we're soon going to see, becomes his unfair advantage, and it allows him to climb the stairs in the ranks of his jobs and also in his pay. Now, at the age of 13 here, his family, they make the really hard decision to move to America. His mother and his father, they're so poor that they have to go out and borrow 20 pounds to pay for the passage on the ship to America. The family, they now have this black mark of debt against them. This is just another weight on their back that they have to carry. Carnegie, he leaves school forever. He could read, he could write, he was good at math, and he wrestled with English at very best. And so Carnegie leaves his beloved home of Dunfermline behind. He watches it fade from view as they ride the train towards the seaport. Then things continue to darken. He's so resistant to get on the ship that the sailors, they have to rip him away from his uncle's grasp as he's screaming, "I cannot leave you! I cannot leave you!" And I can really feel that promise, it's sinking deeper into his soul to never let this happen when he becomes a man. Once he's loaded onto the ship, the family, they set sail, and this is the year 1848. They're on an 800-ton ship that's called the Wiscasset, and they're out on the open seas. Andrew, he can't sit still. Just imagine sitting around for 50 days doing nothing. I really see a lot of myself in Carnegie and what he did right here, because I would absolutely go crazy just sitting around for that long. During the 7 weeks of voyage, I came to know the sailors quite well, learned the names of the ropes, and was able to direct the passengers to answer the call of the boatswain. In the boatswain, that's the person on the ship that's in charge of like the ropes and the sails, things of that nature. The ship, it was said to be undermanned, and they really needed a lot of help trying to take control of the passengers to move them around safely. So this is what Carnegie did. And as a reward, he was invited by the sailors to join them on Sunday for a special treat that they called plum duff, and I had to look this up what it was. This was like a sweet pudding that they would enjoy on Sunday as a reward for the week and to get them ready to move forward to the next week. Perhaps in a different life, maybe Carnegie would have become a sailor, but as they reach America, he does say, I have this regret leaving the ship. He had become friends with many of the sailors. They land in New York, which he says is really bewildering because there's people are moving around frantically everywhere. There's these great buildings of industry that are towering above. Everything was just massive and big compared to what he was used to in Scotland. But they don't stay in New York for very long because their destination is Pittsburgh. Quickly, they find themselves back on a boat for another 3 weeks. Along the way, they see men constructing the Erie Railroad. And this is really interesting because on episode 4, we talked about Jay Gould and his lengthy battle to take control of the Erie Railroad. And it's just interesting that we see a young Carnegie here with his own eyes witnessing the road being built. And he says that when it's finished, it's going to cut the travel time from New York to Pittsburgh from 3 weeks down to 10 hours. He's seeing technology advance humans forward with his own eyes right here. At last, they do arrive. Our friends in Pittsburgh had been anxiously awaiting to hear from us, and in their warm and affectionate greeting, all of our troubles were forgotten. In waiting for them were the 2 sisters of Andrew's mother, whose name is Margaret. And they make their home in this small second-story apartment. And then down below, what his father did was set up another weaving business, and he began making tablecloths. But like in Scotland, his father, he's faced with trouble. He couldn't find any merchants that were willing to buy his tablecloths in bulk, as they were just not cost competitive to the bigger factories that were using modern technology. So he goes door to door, which is really time consuming, and profits are little at best. New country, exact same result. To help the family, his mother is going to work her fingers to the bone. As usual, my mother came to the rescue. There was no keeping her down. In her youth, she had learned to bind shoes in her father's business, and the skill then acquired was now turned to account for the benefit of the family. Often, midnight would find her at work. This wonderful woman earned $4 a week. All the while, he's watching his mother's actions. She's stitching the shoes, she's feeding the kids, and she's helping the neighbors. That voice inside, it starts talking to Carnegie, telling him it's time to start working on that promise. My thoughts at this period centered in the determination that we should make and save enough money to produce $300 a year, $25 a month, which I figured was the sum required to keep us without being dependent upon others. Meanwhile, his father gives up again. He walks into a cotton factory and he takes a job working for someone else. But he does arrange for his son to get a job at the factory working as a bobbin boy. And a bobbin boy is someone who takes these empty spools of thread off of the industrial sewing machines and they replace them real quickly with these new spools of thread so that the machine doesn't have to stop its production. This was really dangerous work, and they often employed children in this job function as they were small and they could like duck and weave inside and out of these moving machines. So you can just picture in your mind how dangerous that is, moving your arms and your legs around all these moving parts. He says the following: "It was a hard life. In the winter, Father and I had to rise and breakfast in the darkness, reach the factory before it was daylight, and, with a short interval for lunch, work till after dark. The hours hung heavily upon me, and in the work itself I took no pleasure. But the cloud had a silver lining, as it gave me the feeling that I was doing something for my world, our family. I have made millions since, but none of those millions gave me such happiness as my first week's earnings of $1.20 per week. I was now a helper of the family, a breadwinner, and no longer a total charge upon my parents. Imagine $1.20. Let's just say we'll put it in pennies so it looks bigger, stacked up to $100 million. Carnegie is telling us that he's choosing those 120 pennies. Why? Because it represents something much deeper. It's the first step taken to honor the vow that he had made to himself that he's never going to fall into poverty. He now has a path to follow. It reminds me a lot of John D. Rockefeller at the age of like 15 or 16. After 3 months of work, he's handed his first paycheck for $50, and this was on September 26th. This is a day in history for what John D. would always celebrate, and he called it Job Day. He would celebrate it even much more so than his own birthday. For Carnegie, he doesn't stay very long at this first job because he soon takes up employment in another factory. He's making $2 a week now, but it's even worse. Just listen to this. I had to run a small steam engine and to fire the boiler in the cellar of the bobbin factory. It was too much for me. I found myself night after night sitting up in bed trying the steam gauges, fearing at one time that the steam was too low and the workers above would complain that they would not have enough power, and at another time that the steam was too high and that the boiler might burst. He hides these nightmares of dying in a boiler explosion from his parents, and he accepts the torment in the factory and in his bed. Just think about it. $2 a week. Tormented. And it gets even worse. He gets stuck working alone in a room down below, and he's bathing new spools of thread in these vats of oil, and the smell is absolutely killing him. I never succeeded in overcoming the nausea produced by the smell of the oil. But if I had to lose breakfast or dinner, I had all the better appetite for supper, and the allotted work was done. These are just a few examples of the factory work, and this wasn't uncommon at all in history. He's just a kid. It really does break your heart. But for Andrew, he's going to be given a break here real soon. One day, the owner of the factory asked him, "How was your penmanship?" So he's given a little test and he passes with flying colors. And soon, Carnegie, he's elevated out of the danger of the boiler room into the office, where he quickly finds his way into the ledger books. And these were old style ledger books that were just single entry. Carnegie, he already knew that all of the great firms out there, they were starting to turn to double entry accounting. So he goes out and he enrolls in night school with a few of his friends. This is another step to keeping that promise, always learning non-stop. His father got rolled over by the advancing ways of men. Andrew, he goes in the opposite direction. If we jump forward just about a year or so from 1849 to 1850, Carnegie is given a chance to interview as a messenger boy for the telegraph office. So he puts on his best white linen shirt and he sets out with his father in tow. We arrived at the door and I asked my father to wait outside. And why does he do this? Well, because he had felt that his Scottish accent had worn off, he's becoming assimilated, and he really wanted to go at this alone. And he thinks that he's going to look smarter without his old Scottish father hanging by his side. The interview was successful. I took care to explain that I did not know Pittsburgh, that perhaps I would not be strong enough, but all I wanted was a trial. Asked how soon I could come, I said that I could stay now, if wanted. If we jump into Carnegie's mind here, his thinking is simple. If I don't say yes right now, someone else is going to come along tomorrow and they're going to take my spot, or perhaps even in the next hour. It's really perfect thinking for you and I. This is going to show up in our lives and in our business careers. We have to be prepared to seize the moment when something like this shows up. Be like Carnegie. Here, he takes another step up. I was lifted into paradise. Yes, heaven, as it seemed to me, with newspapers, pens, pencils, and sunshine all around me. It's like jumping into a pool of knowledge for him. There was scarcely a minute in which I could not learn something or find out how much there was to learn in how little I knew. I felt that my foot was upon the ladder and that I was bound to climb. Climb and pay he does. He goes to $250 a week. He's more than doubled his salary in just a year. At this time in history, to be a messenger boy was a really big deal. The telegraph, it was new, and it was mostly used by business and wealthy people. On episode 16, we had covered Jim Casey, who was also a messenger boy just 50 years later in the year 1900. This was a really big change between 1850 and 1900 because the telegraph, it had become commonplace, and messenger boy jobs where they were just common and they were delivering messages to common people. Anybody could do it. But Jim, like Andrew, knew that the real beauty of this job comes in the form of service. And that's why we have UPS today. Now, if we hop back to Andrew, he studies like the world is about ready to end, and he is the only one who can go out and save it. At night, I exercise my memory by naming in succession the various firms. Before long, I could shut my eyes and, beginning at the foot of the business street, call off the names of the firms in proper order along one side to the top of the street, then crossing on the other side and go down in regular order to the foot again. This is what it looks like to get ahead, like a Estee Lauder visualizing closing that big sale, or Elon Musk seeing his Falcon rocket reach orbit 5 years before it actually did. Projecting yourself there, it pays off huge. Carnegie, he takes it even further. The next step was to know the men themselves, for it gave a messenger a great advantage and often saved a long journey if he knew members of employees of firms. He might meet one of these going direct to his office. It was reckoned a great triumph among the boys to deliver a message upon the street. People that come into contact with Carnegie, they really feel his sunny personality. It's radiating from him. And he says, "It was while in this position that I laid the foundation of my closest friendships." And one such friend is Tom Miller. Tom's going to introduce Andrew to Colonel James Anderson, who had just opened his personal collection of 400 books to working boys. This was really a blessing for Andrew, and he says, "There came, however, like a blessing from above, a means by which the treasures of literature were unfolded to me." Each Sunday he has a new book in his hand. In this deep love of self-learning, it opens up in his heart and in his mind, for which he never stops. This collection of 400 books one day is going to lead to over 2,500 libraries that Carnegie builds all over the world. And he's going to become known as the patron saint of libraries. That is awesome. Now, about a year later here, his boss is going to ask Andrew to start filling in the telegraph operator position when someone was out sick or they were late. This is a really big honor. Like how he had memorized the streets and the faces of the businessmen, he takes things a step further here. At the time, it's common for all of the messages to come in on these running slips of paper. Then the operator would just read everything to a copyist. But man, they're starting to get better at this craft, and they're learning to take messages by ear. So they're not looking at the strip of paper anymore. They're just listening to what's coming in, and then they would directly write it down on paper, and this saved them a step in the process, so they didn't need this extra labor to write everything down. They didn't need a middleman. They could just write it down directly. So as a result, he's going to be promoted to full operator at the age of only 17, making $25 a month. I was now performing a man's part, no longer a boy's, earning $1 every working day. And if we think back just a little bit here, his goal was to earn $25 a month, a goal that he had visualized to help keep that deep promise that he made all those years before in Scotland has now come true. Another thing that Carnegie does around this time is he joins a literary society, and his love of reading deepens even further, and he begins to perfect his public speaking skills here. He's often giving summaries of books that he was reading. Like how I had mentioned on episode 24 that the Jim Casey talks at his yearly conferences reminded me of the original podcast. It's kind of the same thing here, except they're live and in person. Some wise advice that I learned from Andrew Carnegie, he would say the following. My 2 rules of speaking then and now were, make yourself perfectly at home before your audience and simply talk to them, not at them. Do not try to be somebody else. Be your own self and talk. Never orate until you can't help it. Such good advice. I'm trying to get better at that myself, to talk to and not at. Trying to shift from a teacher to more of a story shower or a storyteller. Those are really the kind of podcasts that I naturally drift towards, the ones that feel natural and they hold your attention. This is really what I'm after, if at all possible. Just to be myself, to tell a good story about a good book. And through these stories, the lessons, they just present themselves naturally. Okay, let's see. Back to Carnegie here. So he's working in the telegraph office. In one weekend, the lines, they go down. There was a bad storm. And Carnegie, he's sent out on a boat to try to help fix them. And on the boat, he finds something that absolutely breaks his heart. I learned that my father was going to Wheeling and then to Cincinnati to sell tablecloths that he had woven. I remember how deeply affected I was on finding that instead of taking a cabin passage, he had resolved not to pay the price, but to go down the river as a deck passenger. I was indignant that no one so fine a nature should be compelled to travel as such. Heartbroken is the right word here. He makes a promise to his father on this day that he would one day make enough that he and his mother would ride together in a fine carriage. He was so upon the occasion and grasped my hand with a look which I often see and can never forget. He murmured slowly, Andra, I'm proud of you. Those words ran in my ears and warmed my heart for years and years. We understood each other. His father, he's going to pass away not long after this. He never got to ride in that carriage. Like the vow of his youth to never know poverty as a man, this new vow, it adds another layer on top of the existing one. If we jump forward just a little bit here, he meets a man who changes everything. Thomas Scott, he was the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad. In Mr. Scott, he would drop by the telegraph office in the evening to send and receive his messages. And he was so impressed by Carnegie that he soon hires him to be his personal clerk and his operator at the amazing salary of $35 a month. Carnegie, he's not aware of this yet, but Tom Scott is going to become his mentor, his protector, his door opener, and his lifelong friend. In fact, Carnegie calls him a genius in his autobiography. And so with this new position, it places Andrew at this fiery nerve center of the railroads and the telegraphs. I was plunged at once into the company of coarse men. I was not happy about it. I ate necessarily of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for the first time. At home with his mother, that is his heaven. At office, well, this is his hell. But like all great men, he learns to navigate the map of characters. The experience with coarse men was probably beneficial because it gave me a disgust at chewing or smoking tobacco, also at swearing or the use of improper language, which fortunately remained with me through my entire life. At work, Carnegie, he finds shelter in Thomas Scott, becoming more attached to what he calls a great man and his hero. And he can see that Thomas Scott is one day going to be the president of Pennsylvania Railroad. In Carnegie, like his past jobs, he doesn't sit on the bench waiting to be told what to do. He's studying. He's studying all of the railroad maps. He's memorizing the stops, the names of every conductor and every brakeman on the entire line. Every train order, every dispatch, every emergency on the line, it flows through his office. And Carnegie is sitting right next to the man who controls all of this, Mr. Scott. In Mr. Scott, he sees Carnegie's actions. This leads to more duties, more responsibility, more trust. Now, the next story that happens, this is just nuts. Carnegie, he puts everything on the line. This could have ended him right here. Because you see, the Pennsylvania Railroad, it's just a single line. It's used for westbound and eastbound trains at the same time. So what they would do is they would use the telegraph to signal ahead to the various stations, and this would tell trains to either proceed or to pull over to a side track so that oncoming trains could pass by. The only person that was authorized to give orders was the superintendent of the railroad, or Mr. Scott in this case. And so he would give the orders, and they would all be sent out by the operators with his name at the very end so that people knew that this was an authorized action from Mr. Scott. Well, one morning, Carnegie, he reaches the office and he finds that Mr. Scott, he hasn't quite arrived yet. Andrew looks at the clock. Time passes. He looks again. More time passes. All the trains are at a standstill. The express train, the passenger train, and the freight trains. Nothing is moving, and this was due to an accident that had taken place. Everyone is sitting around waiting on Scott. Tick tock, Mr. Scott. Carnegie, he knows the positions of all the trains. He knows how to get everything moving again. He's done this hundreds of times before in Mr. Scott's name. He says, "Finally, I could not resist the temptation to plunge in, take the responsibility, give train orders, and set matters going. I knew it was a dismissal, disgrace, perhaps criminal punishment for me if I erred. On the other hand, I could bring in the weary freight train men who had laid out all night. I could set everything in motion. I knew just what to do, and so I began. I gave the orders in his name, started every train, sat at the instrument watching every tick, carried the trains along from station to station, took extra precautions, and had everything running smoothly when Mr. Scott at last reached the office." So Mr. Scott shows up and he's heard of the delays, and his first words to Andrew are, "Well, how are matters?" He came to my side quickly, grasped a pencil, and began to write his orders. I had to then speak, and timidly said, "Mr. Scott, I couldn't find you anywhere, and I gave the orders in your name early this morning." Mr. Scott's reply, "Are they going all right?" Carnegie, he shows him all the messages, the positions of the trains. Everything is in perfect order. Scott stares, and Carnegie, he can only stare back for a second, and his eyes shift to the floor. Scott stares more. Finally, he walks away. And at the end here, Scott, he didn't verbally approve of what Carnegie had done, but he didn't punish him either. The boy who had watched his father sit still While the world changed around him, he's now a man and he's not going to sit still. He knew the right thing to do. He took the risk and it earns him even more respect with his employer. Now, a few weeks later, one of his coworkers who was a freight agent, he's going to retell a talk that he had with Mr. Scott. And Mr. Scott had told this freight agent the following: "Do you know what that little white haired Scottish devil of mine did?" "No," says the agent. "I'm blamed if he didn't run every train on the division in my name without the slightest authority." "And did he do all right?" asked the agent. "Oh, yes, all right," was Mr. Scott's reply. After that, Scott seldom gave the orders. Carnegie runs the trains. To end the story, Carnegie leaves us with something to think about here. The battle of life is already half won by the young man who is brought personally in contact with high officials. And the great aim of every boy should be to do something beyond the sphere of his duties, something which attracts the attention of those over him. Not long after this, Scott's going to come to him with an offer: 10 stock certificates of Adams Express. All he needs is $500, for which he has less than $50 saved up. So he races home. He convinces his mother to mortgage the house that they had just paid off, and with money in fist, he plops down $500. His first step from wage earner to investor. A month later, a small white envelope shows up on his desk. Inside, $10. "Eureka!" I cried. "Here's the goose that lays the golden eggs." He is so extremely happy. Month after month, Carnegie finds another envelope on his desk. This is only the very beginning. The promise has taken firm root. It's pushing up through the soil to never know poverty. His investments, they're steady. He puts money in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company. This later merges with the Pullman Company. And he invests in the Columbia Oil Company. At work, he climbs the ladder. His boss, Mr. Scott, gets elevated to vice president, and he brings Carnegie up many steps to superintendent of the railroad at just the age of 24. When asked if he thought he could do it, Carnegie says, "I was in an age when I thought I could do anything. I knew nothing I would not attempt, but it had never occurred to me that anybody else, much less Mr. Scott, would entertain the idea that I was yet fit to do anything of the kind proposed." When he's asked what salary he should expect, Carnegie says, "What do I care for salary? I don't want the salary, I want the position." He knows that the position is like a slingshot. You just have to work your ass off, get in the seat, pull it back, hold on, and let it launch you. In this case, right into the Civil War that had broke out in 1861. Carnegie finds himself in Washington, overseeing the military trains and the telegraphs, and he's working for Mr. Scott, who is now the Assistant Secretary of War. Occasionally, he would have a special visitor into his telegraph office, waiting on messages to learn about the progress of the war. See if you can draw out who this visitor is while I read the description. He was so marked a feature that it was impossible for any one man to paint him and not produce a likeness. He was certainly one of the most homely men I ever saw when his features were in repose. But when excited or telling a story, intellect shone through his eyes and illuminated his face. His manners were perfect and natural, and he had a kind word for everybody, even the youngest boy in the office. The way that Lincoln is described makes you feel like you're in Carnegie's shoes, living that experience. I've reread that paragraph at least a dozen times. It's definitely one of my favorites outside of any of the business knowledge we learn here. He's just describing Lincoln, and I find it just really down to earth, factual, and to the point, punctual, and it just hits you. For Carnegie, he's only going to help the war efforts for maybe about a year or so. Mr. Scott, he's needed back at the railroad, and naturally, Carnegie, he's going to follow. But something major had happened. If you think back to episode 22 in Leonard Lauder, how he used this term lateral creativity. He was observing what worked in business or life, and then he was using what he saw in his own business. Carnegie, he's doing the exact same thing here. He's building a playbook. He sees the really deep need for the railroads, for bridges, for locomotives, and for armor. And what do all of these things need? Iron and steel. He sees all of the money that's flowing to private businesses for supplies. He sees all of this in the telegrams. Each one is like a drop of water, just making that promise grow. Thinking about this, each business he opens after the war is either a rail mill, a bridge company, a locomotive works, a blast furnace, or a steel mill. The war, it didn't make Carnegie a soldier, it made him a capitalist. Back home in Pennsylvania, Carnegie, one day he sees his first small iron bridge that the railroad had constructed, and this was a really big deal. And wouldn't you know it, a few weeks before this, one of the wooden bridges that the railroad was using had caught fire. That stopped the passenger trains for 8 days. That was intolerable. And that's all it took. Carnegie, along with Mr. Scott and a few others, they formed the Keystone Bridge Company. And here's the thing with iron bridges of that era, many of them failed. Builders used cast iron for the entire bridge, which was prone to cracking, especially during times of heavy impact or if there was severe weather. Carnegie, he took a different approach, and he uses wrought iron on the upper portions of the bridges, which is not as brittle and it has some flexibility to it. Plus, he says, we were our own severest inspectors. We would build safe structures or none at all. The surest foundation of a manufacturing concern is quality. After that, and a long way after that, comes cost. And the result for them was a reputation of strong bridges that never failed. This allowed him to win contract after contract. Major bridges such as the Steubenville Bridge, which is a 300-foot bridge over the Ohio River, this kickstarts their reputation as a builder. They construct many bridges across the Mississippi River, specifically Dubuque, Keokuk, and then their crown jewel, which was the Eads Bridge in St. Louis. And this particular bridge, it's still in operation 151 years after it was open. That's quite impressive. And I was just looking at it the other day, and it says that over 8,100 cars a day still pass over that bridge. This St. Louis Bridge, it's also the first ever to be constructed of pure steel. The whole bridge was steel. And to help fund the construction, Carnegie, he had agreed to go out and sell $4 million worth of bonds. So to do this, he set sail for Europe, which is a major investor in the United States railroads and heavy industry. Now, while he's in Europe, he visits local iron and steel manufacturing facilities. And I think about this kind of in the same way as like Sam Walton. He was out there visiting stores while he was on vacation. He was writing down all the best ideas in his yellow legal pad, and then he would run back to his store and put everything into action. For Carnegie, he sees these new ways how to quickly produce steel. In this method, it's called the Bessemer process. In this process, it uses forced air that burns off all the carbon that made iron brittle, thus making it possible for steel to be born. Before the discovery, steel, it was just made in these really small batches, and it took hours and hours just to get a little bit of it. And it also cost a lot of money to make steel. After the discovery, tons of steel can be made in 15 or 20 minutes very cheaply. Carnegie, he was well aware that the iron rails that were being used in the United States were being replaced every 6 to 8 weeks. As a boy, he watches his father pass on all of this new and upcoming technology, and he gets left behind. This promise that he makes to himself, it's grown into a very large oak tree at this point, and it stays true. He grips this technology full force, and back home in the iron mills, he makes this shift to producing steel. So at this point, I've gotten a little bit ahead in the book. It does jump around a lot. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time just a little bit to the start of the bridge building business. Carnegie, when he started this company building bridges, he also forms Cyclops Mills. And that is by far the best name of any company I think that he ever started, at least in my opinion. And the reason I wanted to focus on this is because it has to do with cost control. Carnegie is known for his strict cost control, and it goes straight back to that promise. And just listen to this. How would this make you feel if you were a business owner? As I became acquainted with the manufacture of iron, I was greatly surprised to find that the cost of each of the various processes was unknown. Inquiries made of the leading manufacturers in Pittsburgh proved this. It was a lump business, and until stock was taken and the books balanced at the end of the year, the manufacturers were in total ignorance of results. I felt as if we were moles burrowing in the dark, and to me, this was intolerable. Moles burrowing in the dark is absolutely correct. Carnegie puts a system in place that allows them to measure each process, from the materials that they use in each step to the amount of manpower needed to complete a task. Every action is accounted for. It reminds me a lot of Henry Ford, who recorded every single movement of his workers in his factories along with the materials that they used. He tracked everything, and this gave him cost control power that he can see in his ledger books. John D. Rockefeller was the exact same way. He was known for chasing missing pennies. Rockefeller and Carnegie, they were both trained as bookkeepers. For Andrew, as pages fall off the calendar, change comes. He says, one of the chief sources of success in manufacturing is the introduction and strict maintenance of a perfect system of accounting so that responsibility for money or materials can be brought home to every man. This strict cost control, it lets Carnegie see that they're spending a lot of money on fuel to heat the iron in the steel ovens. So he invests heavily in technology. He puts in new gas ovens from Siemens, and they build more and bigger blast ovens that would increase their output. His competitors point fingers and laugh at him because they believe this is wasteful spending on technology. Carnegie, he saw his father destroyed by technology, and he's not going to make this same mistake. And his cost accounting system proves 100% that he was right, and he never looks back. So in 1865, he makes the decision to leave the railroad behind, and in his mind, he tells himself the following: I was determined to make a fortune, and I had no means of doing this honestly at any salary the railroad company could afford to give. He can clearly see what his efforts have produced for the first 29 years of his life. When I lay down at night, I was going to get a verdict of approval from the highest of all tribunals, the judge within. Carnegie, he's such a great writer. The judge within, that's fantastic. No longer is he going to be judged by reporting to some boss. That judge inside, the one that had resolved to never know poverty, to provide that fine carriage for his parents, this is the driving force behind everything. Not long after Carnegie and his mother, they moved to New York and they established a new headquarters there. He's going to direct strategy, and he's going to be connected with other businessmen like Jay Gould, James Fisk, JP Morgan, and Rockefeller. These men, such as Jay Gould, they put a lot of pressure on him to join their firms. They saw that he was super talented, and Gould had offered him to pay any price that he wanted. Carnegie, he declines. Over the next few years, he finds himself invested in all these different companies. And each morning when he comes to the office, the first thing he does, his eyes go right to the stock prices. And he's watching his own actions like outside of his body, and he's paying attention to what he's doing. This is like what we spoke about on episode 23 with Mickey Singer, who talks about watching the voice in your head, watching what it's saying, and how to take control of that voice. Carnegie, he sees all of these forces all around him, and he knows that his attention is divided. He sees each hour of the day as like a different basket, and he finds some of those baskets, they go bad. Like when he leaves on a trip and one of his trusted men goes out and sells all of his shares in the Union Pacific Railroad. That made him look really bad, and he didn't like that. Plus, he's under a lot of pressure here to help build new railroads in the western part of the United States. And he's noticing these actions more and more all the time. And he comes to the following conclusion: I made up my mind to go entirely contrary to the adage not to put all one's eggs in one basket. I determined that the proper policy was to put all good eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. For some reason, the first person that pops in my mind when I read that, other than Carnegie himself, is Harry Schneider, who was the founder of In-N-Out Burger. From the day he started In-N-Out in 1948, all he did was watch his basket. Super simple focus, but deeper than just about anybody on quality control, clean stores, and friendly service. The result: beautiful golden eggs overflowing from his basket. Carnegie, he moves swiftly to rid himself of investments. In his words, they ring true. As for myself, my decision was taken early. I would concentrate upon the manufacture of iron and steel and be the master in that. I believe the true road to preeminent success in any line is to make yourself master in that line. Carnegie is going to row his boat upstream with technology in tow. All the profits that he makes in his plants are plowed back into his expansions. More ovens, more plants, and more men. And the first company chemist. And like before, others, they just point and laugh. When competitors say they can't afford a chemist, Carnegie, he sees his father operating in a blind world like moles. Through chemistry, mines that were guessed to be poor turn out to be of high quality. And what was guessed to be high quality ironstone is actually proven to be poor. Good becomes bad, bad becomes good. And Carnegie says, great secrets did the doctor open up to us. Knowledge is power. Like knowing every street and every businessman's face at the age of 13, he understood what was inside of the eggs of iron and steel. The basket grows. He opens Edgar Thomas Steelworks in 1875. Strict cost controls and product understanding allow him to undercut most of the mills. Year after year, they break production records. Day and night, steel rails, structural beams, and armor plate roll off the line. 2,000 tons of iron and steel a day. Now, the one thing that they need to make steel is coal cakes or coke. And to make coke, what you do is you bake coal for a few days, and this burns off all of the sulfur, and it leaves just the carbon. And when you have just the carbon in this coal cake, it burns super hot. And this is what they need for their blast ovens. Think about it like this. It's super simple. No coke, no steel. And Carnegie, he doesn't like not having control of his coke supply. So what does he do? He goes out and he scouts out the best coke company in the United States, which wasn't far from him. It was the Frick Coke Company. They controlled over 42,000 acres of coal land. And it turns out that the Frick Coke Company had more than just Coke, it had Henry Clay Frick, who was also a deeply driven founder, who Carnegie describes in the following way. It had in Mr. Frick himself a man with a positive genius for his management. He had proved his ability by starting as a poor railway clerk and succeeding. Frick, he had started with nothing. He went and borrowed $10,000 from Judge Mellon, and then he went out and bought up distressed coal fields during the financial panic of 1873. And this made him a millionaire many times over by the time he was 30 years old. So in 1882, Carnegie, he negotiates to buy half interest in his company, the Frick Coke Company. He now owns the raw materials that are feeding the furnaces. The company and Frick the man are new eggs in his basket. Frick is going to become key in running those day-to-day operations. In Carnegie, he steps back and he runs the strategy. A year later or so, everything is going to be organized into Carnegie Brothers and Company, with his brother Tom overseeing the mills. And their goal? Simple. Own everything, from the mines where the coal and the ironstone come from, to the plants, all the way out to the finished rails. Pure vertical integration. Their growth is rapid. 2,000 tons a day turns into 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 tons a day. As we move into 1886, Carnegie faces some personal struggles when his brother Tom dies of pneumonia, and then a few days later, his beloved mother Margaret passes away, and he's simply devastated. And at the same time, he's also bedridden with typhoid fever of his own, and he feels really left alone in the world. He's really at a low point in his life, but he's going to recover. And in the next year, in 1897, at the age of like 51 or 52, he's going to marry his wife, Louise. They would go on to have one baby daughter together, who they would name Margaret after his mother. Carnegie comes to lean very heavily on Henry Clay Frick more and more to lead the factory output. Most of the profits that they earn, they're put back into the business. But there is a fight. There's always a fight. The fight is with the workers. They see in the newspapers how much profit is being made by Carnegie and Frick. And as such, they really want their cut of the wages, and they want proper working hours. They want everything to line up in their favor. And over a 10-year period of time, tensions in the plant with the workers, they would bubble up. They'd put a lid on them. They'd simmer down. They'd bubble back up again. They'd put another lid on it. But in 1892, things finally boil over. Carnegie, he's in Scotland. He's on holiday. Frick's in charge at the factory. And men, they're going to go out on strike. Frick, he was against strikes. So he goes out and he finds 3,000 or so non-union men that are ready to work. Carnegie, he had previously written to Frick and he told him to wait, to let things resolve. Frick doesn't listen. He takes things into his own hands. So he goes out and he orders the plants to be opened. To help with this, to get these non-union folks over the picket line, he hires 300 Pinkerton detectives, and they're going to be guards. So when they arrive, the striking workers aren't happy about this. Gunfire breaks out. 3 of those Pinkerton detectives and 7 Union strikers are going to be killed. And it was a complete bloodbath on both sides. The governor of Pennsylvania is going to send in 8,000 militia troops to help take control of the situation and to break up that strike. Carnegie, he's not going to find out about the bloodbath until 2 days later. And he writes the following in his autobiography about this. Nothing have I ever had to meet in all my life, before or since, wounded me so deeply. No pangs remain of any wound received in my business career save that of Homestead. It was so unnecessary. In fact, in his autobiography, he barely even mentions Frick. The name's only in there a couple of times. And I'm currently reading the book Meet You in Hell by Les Standiford. And this is about Carnegie and Frick and their partnership. And I hope to cover that with you on the next episode so that we can learn more about the deadliest worker strike in American history and get a better understanding of these two deeply driven men. For Carnegie, as he grows older, he spends most of his time working on his philanthropy and building libraries all over the world. By 1900, his company provides 25% of the world's steel. He had cut cost of steel from $56 a ton down to $11.50. Profits are in excess of $40 million a year. It's wild. So finally, in 1901, Carnegie is going to be asked by J.P. Morgan to name his price for Carnegie steel, for which he writes down $480 million. JP accepts without any negotiation, and his big fat basket of eggs is traded in for another big fat basket of interest-bearing gold bonds that pay him $11 million a year in interest. Carnegie immediately donates $4 million to help the families of those who had been hurt in the Homestead strike so many years before. He's going to go on and give away more than $350 million over the next 20 years. This is a sum that's worth $11 or $12 billion today. In the end, he kept the promise to himself to never know poverty. It was the force that drove everything. If you'd like to pick up a copy of the book, you can use the link in the show notes. And if you do use that link, you'll be helping to support children's literacy as I donate all Amazon affiliate revenue towards that cause. Thanks for listening today. I greatly appreciate your time, and I hope that you do find some value in the episode that can help you in your business or your personal life. That is my ultimate goal. Before we go, I wanted to share a few final words from Andrew Carnegie about his love of books. Books, which it would have been impossible for me to obtain elsewhere, were placed within my reach. In this way, the windows were opened in the walls of my dungeon through which the light of knowledge streamed in. Every day's toil, and even the long hours of night service, were lightened by the book which I carried about with me and read in the intervals that could be snatched away from duty. And the future was made bright by the thought that when Saturday came, a new volume could be obtained the next day. I would not exchange books for all the millions that were ever amassed by man. Life would be quite intolerable without them. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.